Like I said, please feel free to interrupt me at any time with questions. This is meant to be as, you can engage with this as much as you want. It doesn't have to just be, me sitting here talking the whole time. So feel free to ask questions as we're moving. I also wanted to, we're going to have some time at the end today to talk about or like give you guys an opportunity to ask some questions and, just kind of general Blackboard questions as we're reaching the end of the semester. And there's some lingering things you might want to discuss or talk about. I'm happy to give you guys some space for that as well. But today specifically, I just wanted to take some time to go over Blackboard assessments. I'm just not really sure what everyone's experience is with using Blackboard assessments, how much you guys have engaged with it. And I think ultimately, the more autonomy you have over creating, editing, adjusting, implementing assessments through Blackboard, the more you're going to enjoy engaging with it. And the more, you're going to be able to create activities and assessments that your students, can also feel comfortable engaging with. I think at the end of the day, how comfortable you are with the programs and the technology is going to reflect how comfortable our students end up, being with it. So hopefully you guys walk away. Maybe this is some information you all already know, but hopefully some of you guys walk away with some new information here. So to start off, just focusing on what do we use these assessments for? So far with adult ed in our department, we use them for these more summative assessments, midterm exams, final exams. It's a great way to kind of standardize those, have them all in one place. But you guys can also use these as much as you want. Oh, sorry, let me let one more person in. You guys can use these, as much as you want or need, just for sort of more lower level basic, knowledge checks and quizzes and in-class activities. There's a lot of things you can do with these assessments in Blackboard. And if you're looking for more ways to implement those sorts of things, then this is a great way to kind of start playing around with that. So I do also want to kind of get to know from you guys how comfortable you guys are with the experience you guys have with Blackboard assessments. So, and you can kind of show either in the chat or with the little hand emojis or whatever. Have you guys given assessments using Blackboard before? How many people have done that? Okay. So some people say regularly. I see some people saying yes. Beyond that, who has created their own Blackboard assessment? Okay, so some people have created their own. Good, 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 good. So most people, or a lot of people, maybe it's a little split between strictly midterms and finals as they're kind of required by the department. And then some people are working on them on their own, creating their own, which is great. Okay, good. And then my last question, have you guys explored grading through Blackboard? So have you actually gone through, provided grades and feedback through Blackboard for your assessments? Okay, good. So most people have interacted with that aspect. Good. All right, great. So seems like most people are pretty familiar. That's great. Hopefully by the end of this, you guys will feel a little more familiar, learn maybe a couple of new tricks with it. But the main thing is I want to encourage you guys to just explore this as much as you can on your own, to, feel like you're comfortable enough to go into your Blackboard shells and create some assignments or try new types of question styles or explore different ways you can add rubrics and grading feedback and that sort of thing as well. All right, so I'm going to kind of go through the structure around this, and then we'll kind of go in and look at actual examples. So to kind of start off, there's like some basic elements around these assessments that we create in Blackboard. So the first is, how to create an assessment, the basic sort of path to follow in order to create one. I think we all are probably pretty familiar with the fact that a lot of times things are not super straightforward or where you think they'd be in Blackboard. So it's always helpful to just have a quick run through of like that pathway. And then the next step is going to be adjusting those settings in our assessment. And there are a lot of settings we can adjust. This is what I think going to be the most immediately useful to many of you as we're going into finals week here very soon. So that's going to be, how can we, edit the tests that are already made for us, right? You don't have to walk away from here and go make a bunch of assessments, but it's really important that you walk away knowing how to create an exception for a student who has to leave, who has to take her exam early because she's leaving the country, or, be able to reset a student's test, or be able to do these things that often we find that it provides a huge roadblock for us, and it just puts that power in your hands as an instructor. And then of course, grading the assessments, there's a lot of different ways to approach that. So there's the basic grading, and this is going to depend on the questions that you create in your assessment. So if you want to make it really easy for yourself and you're creating a multiple choice test and it automatically grades, and then bing, bang, bam, you're done and it's graded and you don't have to do anything. But there's other ways that you can approach it. You can provide feedback to students. You can create rubrics. You can create different answers, being like different acceptable answers as well. So it'll be good to just take a look at that as well. And then we're going to kind of briefly touch on how to add assessments to your Blackboard shell from add someone else's exam to your Blackboard shell, right? How to take something from the Blackboard forum, or how to borrow an assessment from a colleague that they created and you want to use it, and be able to do that on your own also. So to start with just creating assessments, I have a few screenshots, but like I said, I'm going to go in and we'll kind of go through this whole thing together as well. But the first thing we want to do is you want to have the location that you're focused on and where you're building it. So either create a folder, or, if you're in a certain week of your content, just make sure you're in that space before you go to build. And so this should be a little bit familiar here, where we have those different options within a folder to create. So this would be under assessments, you choose test. If you're creating a test, we'll talk more about uploading a test, but creating a test, you're just going to go through the process, clicking the create button at the bottom. And then we're going to start, creating some of that background information around the test. So here we always want to have a test name. Make sure you're mindful about how you name your tests, and make sure that you are, because we ideally want to create assessments that we could potentially export and use in a future class, or export and use at a different date. It's good to be as detailed as you need to be with your titles, so that it's easier for you to identify and access later. That can be extremely helpful for you in the future. So also with the description and instructions, I like to just typically have that be the same information. I think it never hurts to have our students see instructions over and over again before they take a test. So I typically have very detailed instructions in both the description and instructions box there. You do not have to fill those in, but I think, in regards to making our students and providing an opportunity for our students to be as successful as possible, having very clear, explicit instructions in here is going to be really important. So don't just kind of pass over that aspect, and make sure that you're taking your time with that as well. Also, one thing I just want to point out with instructions, this should also reflect how you create your settings. So if you are giving students multiple attempts, make sure you let them know in the instructions. If you're telling students that there's a 30-minute time limit, make sure they know in the instructions that there's a time limit. If they cannot close and re-enter the test, then make sure that they know that. This is going to be a really good way to just avoid those frantic emails later and save you some time with having to reset a test or extend time limits. So be very clear about reflecting the settings you create in those instructions and description as well. All right, and then once you've created your test, it's going to give you this sort of general backdrop here. And there you have the opportunities to start creating questions. Okay, so you can see that part right there, that's where we're going to start then creating our questions. And you can just do it question by question, multiple different types of questions in one assessment, of course, and then it'll kind of add up as you build it. So when we are creating questions, you're going to see this sort of list of these are all the different types of questions we have, and we can take some time to take a look at each of those types of questions as well. But it's important to notice as we're creating questions that each question, and I'll show you this here in a moment, but each question as you're building it will have a question title and a question text. The question text is going to be the question itself. That's going to be the question that our students see as the question that they need to answer. The question title, you do not need to have a question title. However, if you want to include a question title, it can be helpful, again, if you wanted to, in a later date, export that question and then use it in another test. So that's just for you to kind of have an easy way to reference in the future. Typically, I do not bother with exporting and importing individual questions. So I typically leave my question titles blank. It's not necessary to create the question itself, but just don't confuse the two, because if you only have a title, you can't just have a title, you need to have the text. So the text is the most important part there. You're going to have options for each question in regard to how you want to allow students to answer it, if there's more than one answer for the question. That's going to kind of depend on what type of question you're working with, but we'll look at that a little bit closer. You'll then need to provide the answer or multiple answers that are correct. And then we're going to look at the option of using a rubric. Has anyone imported and used rubrics in Blackboard? Does anyone have experience with that?
I've used rubrics, but not for assessment. In assignments.
Okay,
for
great.
Assignments, writing assignments, I usually use a rubric.
Okay, fantastic, good. So not as much experience with rubrics. Rubrics can be great. They're particularly great as a way to quickly be able to grade like essay questions, right? I think one thing a lot of instructors tend to feel like there's limits around with Blackboard is, essay questions, how to provide feedback, how to grade efficiently without, having 3 different places to do it. So you can do it all in Blackboard, and it is really great, but providing that rubric is going to be, in my opinion, the easiest way to do it really effectively and smoothly. So we'll look at that. And then it also gives you an opportunity to have automatic feedback. So if a student answers with a question or answers a question with an incorrect answer, you can have an automatic feedback response that says, nice try again, or like incorrect, or whatever sort of feedback you want to give. Again, you don't have to offer feedback, but if you feel like that can be a supportive element for your students, it is there as an option. And then you can also include instructor notes, and that can just be something for yourself to reference while you're kind of looking and creating the test or grading the assessments as well. So looking over at this list of questions, and I apologize if it's too small, I know it might depend on the devices you guys are using at home right now, but these are typically the most commonly used questions that I see when building assessments. So you're going to have either or questions, essay response questions, that kind of goes along with short answer at the bottom. Fill in the blank is very common. Matching is another great way to do it. Multiple choice, of course, opinion scales, and then true or false. So these are all sort of like the more common, pretty easy to navigate around those types of questions. There are a lot of different types of questions here. They have some like more fun style questions in here if you want to explore those as well. But I would say if you do start to include some of those other styles of questions, maybe take some time in your class to make sure your students know how to approach them, make sure you're very clear in your instructions, But these are the more common ones that our students are going to be familiar with probably going into it. So if you do want to include a lot of the, like any of these other ones, just be mindful about, you know, that little learning curve our students may have as well. Okay, so talking a little bit more about creating rubrics, it's pretty simple in the way that they have it set up. They do kind of create, if you choose that essay question, it gives you this little option here for you to add a rubric. So you can see you can add a rubric, you can either select a rubric or create a new rubric. Rubrics are great again as a way to create and then save for later, right? So it really helps to streamline grading essays. Like I said, it offers feedback in the rubric through Blackboard to students. So students can now not only see the grade that they got on that essay, they can see the scores they got on each different, you know, section of scoring that you provide. And then they can also see feedback on each individual section of scoring. And again, we'll look at this in a second, but you can get as detailed with your rubrics as possible. So Soraya just asked, can we copy rubrics from shell to shell? You absolutely can. So if you have, you know, if you know that every semester you're working on argumentative essays and you have an argumentative essay rubric, then you can use that every semester for every rubric, right? And if you have, it doesn't need to necessarily reflect in, you know, scores as well. If you don't want to assign points to the rubric, because you know essays are going to be worth different points depending on what it's for, you can also just set it for like ratio, where you say 30% is for grammar, 30% is for structure, 30% is for this. So you can set it in that sort of like ratio style grading as well. That was my next point. They can be saved and reused. And then this is just kind of a quick screenshot of showing once you've added a rubric, you'll see it right there. And then you have some options to edit it, to make a copy and edit it also if you need to. So that's what those little buttons there are for. Okay, so maybe, well, we'll go through a little bit more. I'm trying to think what would be the best way to do this. Just to give you a quick look at the settings here. So you can see in this image here, I've got the exam that we're looking at. So the exam is already there. It's been built. It's already input into the shell. And then here I've clicked on that little chevron that points down, and these are the options that I have, right? So I want to basically be able to create all of the, or like edit all of the settings around this assessment. So the things you want to think about editing is going to be, we need to set the availability first and foremost, right? And so we need to choose the day and time that, oops, there's a little typo there, the day and time that it is available for students to take, really did a bad job on that sentence, to attempt the assessment. So, you know, that way you can say it's open from Monday at noon until Friday at noon. If you just want it open for one day, you can do that. You know, you can basically set how long of an availability. There's really no limit to that availability. So but you do want to make sure that you edit that first and foremost, because students won't see it if that is off. You can also set a specific availability for a specific student, depending on their schedule or special needs or, you know, absence or whatever it is. So you do have the option to create exceptions outside of that availability that you might set initially for the entire assessment. You can also set time limits. I think as a general rule within the department, what I'm kind of noticing is that you want to give a little extra time than allotted typically for the assessment. So if we say, okay, it should be a 60-minute midterm, don't put 60 minutes, put 90 minutes, right? So always allow that buffer, especially when we're working online and students getting logged off or having internet troubles. It's always good to allow the buffer. So even if you want it to be a 60-minute test, I think it's always important to give a little extra time, and that's pretty much universal throughout the department. And then you can also adjust the number of attempts. If you want students to be able to take it just twice, you can do that. If you want students to take it as many times as they want, you can do that. But number of attempts is really important to look at the other settings in regard to those attempts. So depending on how many times a student can take an assessment, you want to think about how's that assessment going to be graded? How are those attempts going to be graded, right? So do we want it to grade the best score? Do you want it to take an average of the scores? Do you want it to just take the last score? So those are all options that you can do. And it's really important that if you're going to offer multiple attempts, put some thought into how those attempts will then reflect in their grade. You also want to think about how the test results are shared back to your students. So if they are going to take multiple attempts, you maybe want to make sure that they're not seeing at the end of their first attempt all of the all of the correct answers to their incorrect submissions, right? So those are options that you can kind of click on and off. Do I want students to see only their right answers? Do I want students to see the answers to their incorrect answers? Do I want them to see nothing? So that's going to greatly affect how their second or third attempt goes. So make sure you put thought into that about what's going to basically aid them to do better in the next attempt without saying, here are all the correct answers, right? And then you can also edit in the settings the test presentation, right? So that's going to be, do you want it to open in a new window? Do you want it to show all of the questions at once? Do you want it to be one question on the screen at a time? Do you want students to be able to go back to previous questions they've answered or not? Again, this is going to, I think, really depend on the content that you're teaching. If you have a strict order to your test questions, it can be helpful to see them all on the screen at once. You also want to make sure you don't click that randomize questions button. But it can also be helpful if you have students having unlimited attempts, you might want to say randomize questions so that they, or not, depending on how you want it to go. But if you don't want them to be like memorizing just what's right and wrong, that sort of thing. So all of those should really be taken into account in regards to your content and the context of your assessment there. So when you do click this little chevron, you do have a couple of different options here that I think can create a little bit of a hang up. You'll see that we have the edit the test option, and then the edit the test options option, right? So edit the test, that's where we're going to go to edit the content of the test, edit the questions, remove questions, add questions, edit the instructions that we have, right? So all of that's going to be in the edit the test option. The edit test, sorry, I shouldn't be saying option. That's going to be in the edit the test, and then edit the test options is going to be where you see these settings of availability and time limits and number of attempts and results and presentation, okay? So just note that those are both going to be there more than once. You're going to click on edit the test when you mean edit the test options. That's okay. Go back and find that edit the test options and you'll get to it. This chevron is also going to give you quick access to making the test available or unavailable. If you see that it gives you the option to make it unavailable, it means that right now it is currently available to your students. If there's an option for you to click make available, then it means that currently it is unavailable to your students. So if you just need to quickly, you go, oh, I forgot to, set the time or set the date, I just need to make it available, and you just can really quickly go and do that through there as well. Okay, so before we get into grading, I think I'm going to go ahead and jump into Blackboard here. Oops, forgot to sign in. And just kind of take a look at, oops. And just kind of take a look at what this can look like, right? So the first thing that we discussed so far, first of all, before I get into this too much, does anyone have any questions for me right now? before we get into, okay, feel free to interrupt, turn on your microphone. It's totally fine. So I have a million courses in my Blackboard because I'm in all of your courses, but I am going to go to my course here, one of my computers courses that I'm not really using for my class. So it's a bit of an empty shell. So if we just want to start by creating an assessment, so I'm going to just go into my course materials folder here. You can see I created one. I'm going to just quickly delete that so that I can do it again for you. And you can see how easy that was to delete it. So again, that chevron and then delete. So here I'm in an empty folder. I want to add some information. So I have build content. You're not going to see it there, even though in your mind you might think that would be where it is. We want to go straight to assessments, right? And I can go to test. So here you can already see I have two options. I have that create test option, and I have add an existing test here. I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit. I'm using a different computer. Let me see if I can figure that out. There we go. That might help a little bit for you guys. So we have those two options there. I'm not going to go into the existing test adding just yet. So right now we're going to just talk about creating. So I'm going to go ahead and click create a new test. Here I have that test information. Again, we just want to create a name that's going to be useful. So right now I'm just going to call this Tech Talk Test. It's like a tongue twister. And then here we would want to put instructions for the assessment, including time limits, attempts, etc. Right? And then typically what I'll do, just a quick copy and paste instructions with the description, just because I think it shows up in different ways to the students, and I just like to have it show to the students many times. If you would prefer to have a description be an actual description of the test for you to reference later, that's totally fine, up to you. But again, I like to just make the title be as clear as possible so that it's easy to reference, and then submit. And then what we have is the description here, the instructions here, total questions, total points, and it's just sort of blank and empty here. So here we need to create our questions. So I'll go to this create questions, and it gives me that list that I went over with you. So right now, let's go ahead and do an essay so that we can look at rubrics. So I'm going to pick an essay. And this is that difference here, as you can see, question title and question text. So if you are working on an essay question that you might want to reuse in a future date, you can totally have a title here that's very clear. Argumentative essay, right? But you do not have to have a title. It's really just for you. The most important part is that you're making sure you're putting the question in the text part. So here you'll describe requirements for the essay. And that is what our students will see. If you wanted to provide an example of the answer here, you can do that. I don't think that that's typically useful. I think what's more useful tends to be the rubric. So here we see that add rubric. We can either select a rubric we've saved. However, I'm going to go ahead and go to create new rubric just so you can see what these look like and how to edit it. So this opens up in a new box, and it looks like you guys aren't able to see my new box. So let me reshare my Zoom real quick. 1 second. All right, let me share one more time. Just share my whole screen, that should help. Okay, so now you should see that new box that I have here. I'm gonna go ahead and make that full screen. Okay, so this is my new rubric. It's important to name your rubric so you know what that is so you can use it in the future. Argumentative essay rubric. If you want to include a description for yourself, you can. It is not necessary. And then we want to build out that rubric. So here you can see it gives us a grid of criteria. So all of this is editable, right? So you can add more rows or add more columns as needed. You can change the rubric type to either percent or points or point range. I think point range tends to be the most common way I see rubrics used. So we can do that. And it gives you sort of an initial kind of categories. So they have novice, competent, and proficient. You can click on these chevrons and click edit to change those to whatever you want. You know, you can say outstanding, sufficient, needs work, whatever you want that to be. If you want to have letter grades there, right? You can say A, B, C, D if you want instead. But you will set the points here. So novice might be 0 to 5. Then competent would be 6 to 10. Proficient would be 11 to 15. And what that implies is that this is a 15-point essay, right? And then you can grade each element of their essay according to these criteria, or to these, criteria. So you can add right here in the edit, in the text box, what that means. What does it mean to have a novice level of formatting? Okay, so this is going to be visible to your students. They can see that. They can say, okay, a novice level of formatting means this, you know, what do I want? What do I want to be able to portray to get a proficient score, right? And it's important to add that. So if you're creating a rubric for your students and for grading, make sure that you have this clearly displayed so that it's clear for you as you're grading, but it's also clear for your students. This is also a really, I mean, if there are rubrics that already exist for certain essays and in certain classes and certain assignments, then this is also a great thing that, you know, one person can volunteer to say, hey, I went ahead and, you know, created a Blackboard rubric for this thing, and then make it shareable between faculty members. It's a great way to save time and not have everyone doing the same thing over and over. There's no reason to do that, right? So, you know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just need to, you know, we're just kind of trying to transfer information into a more accessible space. So you'll set all of those point values. I'm going to go through and do that real quickly. And make sure that you're, again, explaining how they earned those points. And I think it also helps to really eliminate any question from your students too, as to why they got the grade they got, right? Or gives them maybe a bit of a platform to argue saying, no, but I did these 3 things that are listed in that description for that score, right? It's always helpful, I think, to be very clear with your students about how they're earning the grade they're getting, right? And this is just a way that helps to do that. It creates more transparency. So here we see the criteria that they give us automatically is formatting, organization, and grammar. You can add more elements to that if you want. You can edit those. You can get rid of those. It's totally up to you. Again, these little chevrons just let us edit, delete, all of that. And because we have 3 criteria that are that students can get up to 15 points each, it's telling us down here, this is now a 45-point essay, right? So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to click submit. And now we have it down here and we can access it for other assessments as well. So you can see these, we can click view the rubric, and that's just going to show us a little bit more of a kind of visually friendly, what it looks like here, right? And if I had put text in about what each of those points mean, it would have that underneath it. So that's how our students can kind of see that. And then we can also make a copy of the rubric or edit the rubric here. And then you can say, do you want to show the rubric to students? Which I think that's always the right way to go. But if you guys have a situation where you feel like it's best not to, that's up to you. So yes, with rubric scores, yes, without rubric scores, and then after grading, right? So it's totally up to you. But I think it's always helpful to say yes with rubric scores, as that means they can see it when they're doing the assignment to see, you know, what are they shooting for? What are the objectives, right? So then once you have that, again, you have like a couple of those options, instructor notes. This is not necessary. Again, it's just kind of for you if that's something you want to do. And then you can either press submit or submit and create another. And this kind of gets rid of a middleman when we're creating questions. So if I press submit, it takes me right back to that sort of test homepage here, where we kind of see the structure, the outline of our assessment. So right now we just have the one essay question, argumentative essay. How many points is it worth? Here it says 10. That's because Blackboard always automatically kind of sets points to questions, but it's not communicating with that rubric that we created, right? So always, always, always double check the point value for your questions as you're creating your assessments. This is just like a little hiccup that we run into a lot with Blackboard. So it's always good to just double check once you've created your whole assessment, just double check those little point values. And it's as simple as just editing this like that. Just because that rubric is a separate element that is technically going into it as an attached element, it's not communicating with that element to reflect the point value. So just make sure that that's in there. So any questions around rubrics? Does that feel pretty clear for everybody? All right, sounds good. I'm going to jump into creating another question here. So here I might want to choose multiple choice, right? This is a super common, very self-explanatory type of question. Again, we can have a question title. We do not need it. So question content goes here. As we scroll down, then we have our options around this type of question. Like I said, these options are going to look different based on the type of question that you use. So here we have answer numbering none, or you can have Arabic numerals, Roman numerals, uppercase letters, lowercase letters. It's up to you how you prefer that shows. It's good to be consistent between your questions. You don't need those because they just click on the one they want. So it doesn't really need to have the A, B, C, D or anything. But if you prefer to have it there, if that's something you prefer, that's up to you. And then you can choose if you want vertical or horizontal. Answer orientation, it automatically goes to vertical, as that's what is typical when we think of multiple choice. We have that, top to bottom. And then you can allow partial credit, or you can have the answers be shown in random order if you're worried about students. Oh, hi, Martina. You're back in.
Hi, yes, thank you. I mean, something is going on. Thank you for letting me back in.
No problem. Okay, so, if you want the answers to be in a totally random order for every time someone takes it, again, if you're just giving students as many attempts as they want, it's going to, change it up so they're not just saying, oh, well, it wasn't A or C, maybe it's B or D. This time they have to actually think about the content versus are they, able to just get the answers out of, elimination, right? So that's an option there. Then you can have your answers. So you're going to provide different answers for students to choose. You can choose how many there are. The minimum is 4. Typically, that's what we stick with. If you want to get real wild with it, it gives you a lot of options. I would save yourself the time and not provide 50 options for students to choose, but that's up to you. And then you'll want to put each possible answer in here. So you'll have one here, and then you're going to want to click the little blue circle next to the one that is correct, right? So that's the most important part. As we type in possible answers here, scroll down, then you just want to make sure that you're clicking that little check and it turns blue next to the one that you want to be correct. Possible answer. And possible answer. So there we have our 4. If you want to provide feedback based on whether they get a correct response or an incorrect response, you may do that. This is, another step in a sometimes time-consuming process, so you do not have to. But if you're doing maybe, if you want to add that to your finals as they're getting posted into your Blackboard shells, and you think that's a nice way to add a little touch of, encouragement, feel free to do that. You can do that. So, you can just say something like, great job, nice try, right? Or so close, or try it again, or something like that. These categories and keywords, I don't really mess with them. If someone has an example of using them and that's an effective and useful thing for them, I'm happy to hear about that. I have not really used much in regards to these categories. And that might just be because I haven't, reused questions in that way. So that's kind of just my opinion on that, but I'm happy to explore that a little bit more if anyone's interested. And then again, those instructor notes. So here, I can just press submit. It'll take us back to that home screen. But if we're, on a roll, we're trying to get all of our questions created, just submit and create another. And it's just going to give us another multiple choice question to start working on. Okay. And then we can just go through and do the same thing again. I'm going to click cancel so I don't create another multiple choice question. But now you can see I have 2 total questions, 55 points, because Blackboard thinks every question is worth 10 points. Again, if I want to change that, I just click over here and I can say, no, that's only going to be worth 2 points, right? You also have that extra credit option there if you want to make it extra credit, and submit. So now we have our 2 questions. All right. And there's also the option, if you are creating 10 multiple choice questions, just a quick quiz you want to do in class, you just go through and do that, finish and submit another, or submit and create another, submit and create another, to kind of go through and get question built after question built. And then when you're done, you just want to say, okay, all the questions are going to be worth 1 point. You can just click this select all, say 2 points or 1 point for each one, update, and then it's going to apply a 2-point value to each question. So that's another option for trying to streamline this as much as possible, because as we know, working with Blackboard can feel a little time consuming, and it's good to know any shortcuts and tricks as we're working. So when we're finished, we're going to go down our kind of continue or okay or next button is always going to be down in that right-hand column. I'm going to then, I don't know why it brought me straight to here. Let me see, maybe, oh, okay. So now if I want to add that test, it's going to be right here, Tech Talk test, submit. And now submit again, and it's going to be in my course materials here. You can see that right now the availability says item is hidden from students. The instructions are right here. If you have a difference between instructions and directions, or instructions and description, the description would go here. When students are ready to take it, they'll just click right on it. And this is, again, they'll see the instructions and then begin, and they can just start going through it all. So this is kind of what that looks like for them as they go into it. So I'm gonna go ahead and hop out of here for just a second. Are there any questions immediately right now from anyone?
Yes, I do have a question, Cassidy.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but how long is our training for today?
It's just until 3 o'clock.
Okay.
Yep. So the next thing I'm gonna do is just kind of touch base on a couple more elements. Let me share my screen again. All right. Talked about this. Oops, sorry. I think I went back too far. Okay, so grading. Grading is the last thing or one of the last things I wanted to point out for you guys. The easiest way to get to these submitted tests and submitted assessments is if we go down to the left menu bar and we go down to the bottom and we look under Grade Center, and we just want to go ahead and click on Needs Grading, and that's going to give us an immediate view of what has been submitted and is ready for you to start adding grades to. This provides you the ability to quickly move from student to student. You don't have to go back to like the grading menu every time. You can go from one to the next and kind of power through your grading that way. And this is also where you will be able to access your rubrics for quicker grading, which I should be able to show you how to do that real quick. So this is going to be an easy way. Your rubric will just pop up on the screen next to the essay, and you'll be able to provide feedback under each of those criteria that we created to our students. So it's really a useful way to give feedback to our students that they can look at. Whenever we're trying to provide feedback to our students, though, through Blackboard, we always want to take time out of our class or create, some sort of instructional video like I talked about in our last TED Talk or Tech Talk. I always call it a TED Talk. Where you are demonstrating how students can access that feedback as well. So we never want to assume that our students can navigate Blackboard and new elements of Blackboard. We always want to make sure and check in with them and say, do you know how to access your grades? Do you know how to access the feedback? Here's how you do it if you don't know how to do it. Because there's nothing worse as a teacher than taking the time to give really meaningful feedback and having nobody look at it, right? So it's important that you make sure your students are also able to access that. The actual last thing I want to do quickly is show you how to transfer these pre-existing assessments. So this is a pretty easy process, but it is not very obvious as to how to do it. So I do want to run through that with you. I'm also happy to share a kind of quicker video screen recording of how to do that so that you can do it easily in the future and have quick access for, how that works. So what this does, it makes it so you can save assessments and upload them into future Blackboard shells. It makes it so you can share assessments with other instructors. And then once you upload that new assessment, you can edit it as needed. So if you saw that Martina had a great assessment that she used in her class and you're like, oh, I want, to use that. Do you mind if I take a copy? And then you have a copy, but you're like, I actually don't really like 3 of these questions. I'm going to delete them, or I'm going to change them, or change the point values, or all of that. It's all editable once it's in.
Hey, what's wrong with my questions?
Sorry, Martina, I'm picking on you.
Okay.
So, you can do that as needed once it's in your Blackboard shell. It's a copy, right? You're not taking the actual, like the only copy of the assessment. So it's really useful. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to just kind of show you really quick what that looks like. So I'm back in my courses. I'm going to start in the Adult Education Faculty Forum just because that is where the courses are that I can access. I do not believe that you guys have the access to these as I do. So this is going to be something you will have to do in your own shells. But because I'm an admin in this course, I can do it. So this is where we house our finals and our midterms, and you're going to see exactly how I add finals to your course page. So what I'm going to do is point out first what you might think of, where you might see, okay, here's the midterm, right? I'm going to look at this midterm. Here we have the midterm here, or let me go in it first. So here's the actual midterm. If I click on this midterm, I can start to take it, ESL E82. So we think, okay, I want to download this midterm. I want to take it, right? So we click on this, and you're not given any options for downloading or for copying or anything like that. It's not going to be here. And this is probably the biggest hang up that teachers have, and that anyone using Blackboard has, is we think we're going to get it by visiting the actual test, and that's not where it's going to be. So don't be distracted by that. We want to be in this left menu over here, and we want to go all the way down to the bottom. And we want to go to those course tools. So this is all under course management. And just think like copying tests, exporting tests. This is all under management. It's not going to be in the shell. In the shell is where we have our learning space, right? So this is all going to be in the management side. So we're going to click course tools, and this is in alphabetical order. So we're going to go all the way down to the bottom to tests, surveys, and pools. And then here, it'll take us to this page, and we want to just click on tests, and it's going to give us a list of all the tests we have in this Blackboard shell, right? So here I'm looking for ESL E82. I'm just going to go ahead and do the final exam. And here I'm going to click that chevron and click export. Export. And what that will do is it's automatically going to download the assessment file in the format that it needs to be for easily importing it into the shell we want. So here I have my file. It downloaded right into my browser at the bottom. So now I just want to go back. I'm going to go all the way back to my courses. This is here. If your files don't download into the bottom of your browser like this is through Google Chrome. So I like that it does that because it creates a really easy drag and drop option. But if you use a different browser and it's not there, it will be in your downloads folder. Okay, so it's always available. You just might need to find it in your downloads folder. So I'm going to go ahead and find ESL 82 and just go ahead and upload this final because it's on my to-do list anyways. So I'm going to find Nanette's class here, click on it. And the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that there's a space for that final. So because I'm in someone else's class, I don't want to make any assumptions about where they want it. So what I am doing, and this is a good way for me to point out to you all what your finals will look like in your Blackboard shells. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a content area and I'm calling it final exam, but I am not making it available to students submitting. And what that does is it creates it down here at the very bottom of your menu bar here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on that. For those of you maybe a little unfamiliar, if you see this box with a line through it, that means it's unavailable. So students can't see it and you can't see it as a teacher unless you're in editing mode. Okay, so that's important to take note. So now I'm in this final exam folder and I just want to add that assessment. So I'm going to click test. And this time, oh, well, nope, I skipped a step. Sorry. Like I said, not super intuitive. So you can see it is actually here, but I think it's because I was doing this earlier. So what I'm going to do before I go to add the assessment, because again, we have to be in the management section before we can be in the learning portal area. So again, I want to go to course tools and I want to get into that test center, the test surveys, go to tests again, and then import my test. And what you can do here is just go, so my downloads, it's the most recent download, open, it's right there. Make sure the title is correct and submit. And now the test import is complete. I'm going to press OK. And so now my next step is going to be, so yeah, you can see that this was just added in, that first final exam was added in here in August. So Nanette was on top of it. So what I'm going to do then is go back to that final exam folder I made, go to the assessments, go to test, and click the one I just uploaded and submit. And then it'll take me to that initial test information. Now I can edit it as needed. Even though this was a copy that I took from another Blackboard shell, I can add some instructions here or add some availability here, multiple attempts, do that, set the timer, force completion, all of that information is there. For starters, so when I'm submitting these folders in or submitting these final exams into your shells, I'm not editing anything. I'm just clicking submit. So now you have this final exam, it's hidden from students. So all of you should now have the ability, and final exams are not in all of the Blackboard shells just yet, but they will be by probably Tuesday. But what you'll want to do is you're going to look at your left-hand menu, scroll down to the bottom, find that final exam folder, and then you can go there, click on the chevron, and you want to go to edit test options. So you're not going to want to edit the test because those tests have been standardized by committees by this point for the final exams, but you can absolutely edit the options. And there you can add some instructions, a description if you want, the availability, if you want to make an announcement, multiple attempts, forced completion timer, blah, 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 all of that as well, right? This is where we're going to add those test availability exceptions. So here we can say we want 90 minutes. Oops. Okay, so set timer and then 90 minutes. You can have it be an auto submit or not. So that just means if it's not on auto submit, it just means that it's going to show a timer, but it's not actually going to do anything. So maybe that's good motivation for our students, but we don't want to actually have it submit at 90 minutes. That's up to you. So either way. And then you can also say how long to display it in your Blackboard shell. But you don't have to do this. You can just choose that available button if you want. And then the availability exception. So if I'm going to say, display from the 3rd until the 10th, I have that set. And then I'm going to add an exception. So I might want to choose one of my students and say, oh, I know that this student needs, more time, right? Maybe they need 120 minutes, or maybe they need a couple of attempts, or maybe they need to take it a week later because they're going to be traveling, or that sort of thing. You can add those exceptions for one student or add different exceptions for different students, right? So that option is there, which can be really, really useful for you guys, especially as students have things pop up during finals week, as is known to always happen, right? And you can set a due date if you need to. What that does is just kind of show the students this is due by this date. And then you can more, forcefully say students cannot start the test after the due date if you're worried about that. And then you want to include the test in your grade center. It's kind of up to you. If you're using Blackboard as your grading center, then you will want to do that. If you're not actually using Blackboard as your central space for grades, then don't worry about it. This is where you're going to see that response of, do we want students to see all the answers after the submission, or just their correct answers, or just their submitted answers? Do you want them to show incorrect questions, your feedback, that sort of thing as well? You'll want to click all of those. And then here's that example that I was talking about of test presentation all at once, one at a time. Can they go back to previous questions? Do you want the questions to be random? And then when you're finished, you're just going to click submit. So I'm going to click cancel because I don't want to have all of those things saved. I'm going to hop back to my slideshow here. So I think I've covered pretty much everything. It is exactly 3 o'clock, so we don't really have a lot of time for Blackboard questions. If you want to hang around, I totally have time to hang around and answer any questions. I always think this is going to go not as long as I think it is, and then I just end up talking the whole time. So I apologize for that. But everyone is free to go at this point as needed. I hope it was helpful. This will be posted in the Blackboard forum for you to watch at a later date. And beyond that, I'll be here for another 10 minutes if you guys have any questions, okay?
Thank you, Cassidy. I do have a couple of questions though.
All right, go ahead.
If you don't mind my hanging around.
Not at all, not at all. Thank you guys all for showing up. Happy Friday. Hope you all have a great weekend.
So may I start
Thanks,
with my
Cassidy.
questions? So I won't hold you long.
No, go ahead, Idonia.
Okay, now you're going to load the final exams into our Blackboard shell, is that correct?
Correct.
And are you going to load last year's final exam? Is that the one you're going to load, or is this?
I think so. I think it's the finals that I believe the curriculum committee, or maybe it's, I'm not sure. I know that there's a version of finals that has recently been kind of improved upon and worked upon by a committee. And I believe they say 2020. I don't think it's 2021. So I think it's last year.
I can help
Yeah.
because I'm on the curriculum committee. And
Great.
yes, Idonia, we reworked the midterms, but the finals are exactly the same. They have not been touched. So whatever your final was in 2020, spring semester, it's going to be the same.
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
Thank you,
now
Martina.
that was my concern due to the fact that, well, I guess it's okay because we can review with our students, but since we changed our curriculum and we're now using English discoveries, will that, the new curriculum, will this final exam reflect the new curriculum? That's my question.
So the final exam right now is not going to reflect that new curriculum. It's going to be the same final as last semester. However, I know that this is something Corinne is interested in, you know, approaching and updating and having conversations with instructors in the curriculum committee about is, you know, do we want to switch to like the English discoveries assessments that they have, you know, or that, you know, and being able to, you know, I think there's going to be a lot of discussions in the future about how to manage assessments within these curriculums we're using now. So this semester, it's not going to be a direct reflection of that content. Ideally, there should be a reflection of general content being covered, right?
Okay.
That's the idea with this curriculum in general. However, it is not an English discoveries assessment. So you won't see a complete reflection there.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. But
Okay.
if you have more questions, Idonia, about that, I would reach out to Corinne or Nathan probably, because they're a little bit more involved on, you know, that side of things and understanding the objectives for each course and a little more involved with creating the assessments than I am.
But my only concern is just that you said you will have it loaded by next week, possibly
Absolutely.
Tuesday,
Mhm.
in time for all instructors to have a look at it.
Yes.
Will it be available to us, first of all, so we can see it in order for us to start, you know, reviewing, because I just don't want to go in blindly and not have the students have any idea what to expect on the final exam.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yes, you will be able to access it. Like I said, it will only be in that editing mode. So as long as you are in editing mode in Blackboard, which is that little toggle at the top right-hand corner, you will be able to see it, but your students will not.
Okay.
Mhm.
Very, and I want to thank you very much for
Of
all that you
course.
do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Idonia. Thank you for attending.
Okay, Cass.